Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Festival of Debate event. My name is Joe Chris, and I'm from the not-for-profit social enterprise Opus Independence that runs the festival. The festival programme runs from the 13th of April to the 26th of May and includes over 70 events, 150 speakers and 50 partners. The festival looks to explore the entangled ecological, economic and political crises we collectively face. There are no easy answers, but we hope the festival creates a space to explore and hold complexity and uncertainty and brings together a community of people to make change where they are. I'm now very pleased to hand over Ian Cracknell, who's going to introduce tonight's event. So Ian, if you could turn your video and microphone on, that'd be great. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. Hello, everyone. I'm Ian Cracknell, Advocacy Officer at Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust. Thank you all very much for joining us, and welcome to this Nature and Climate Hustings event for local elections being held on Thursday, the 4th of May. This event is part of Sheffield's Festival of Debate. It's been co-organised by South Yorkshire Climate Alliance, Hope for the Future and Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust. Just give you a very brief overview of these organisations. Hope for the Future is a Sheffield-based national climate charity which works to equip communities, groups and individuals across the country to communicate the urgency of climate change with local politicians. The vision is to see communities and their elected representatives across the UK come together to take decisive action on climate change. South Yorkshire Climate Alliance is an umbrella body of around 50 organisations which aims to bring individual groups together to avoid duplication of effort where there are shared agendas, all with the intention of maximising our potential impact. Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust is a registered charity and works with the local community to protect and enhance the environment in Sheffield and Rotherham, working towards a better future for wildlife, people and the green spaces we all rely on. In organising this hustings, we invited the leaders of all 4 local parties represented in Sheffield City Council to provide a speaker. Both the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats have declined to provide a speaker, so you have to ask your own councillors from these parties to find out where they stand on the questions we'll be asking this evening. However, we are very grateful to be joined by representatives from the local Labour Party and Green Party. Our chair for this evening is Nigel Slack. Nigel describes himself as an active citizen, non-party political and all about questioning politics at a local level in Sheffield and beyond. Nigel is part of the steering group of Sheffield for Democracy, a local community group that campaigns on issues of democracy and public engagement. Nigel, thank you and welcome.
Just before Nigel joins us, just a very small point I forgot to mention earlier. We are using a Zoom webinar for tonight's proceedings. So the chat function is open, and also we'll be using the Q&A box later on in tonight's event for our people on the call tonight to be able to answer questions from the audience. So if you click on the Q&A box, you can add questions, and audience members can also upvote their favourite question. So you just click on the thumbs up button next to a question, and the questions with the most upvotes will get answered first. So yeah, that's it. Over to you again, Nigel. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Ian. Welcome to tonight's event. I will be chairing as an independent person, rather than from any of the organisations that are part of creating this event. And my plan is to keep it as simple as possible, because that's the way that I like to operate these things, and give as much time as possible to the opportunities to ask, answer, and so on, the questions that have been sent in prior by members, and also when we come to the Q&A session, those that attract the most popularity in the chat. So where do we start? Well, we start by asking the party representatives before us to introduce themselves and to give us 5 minutes on their party's stance or policy position with respect to climate and environment. I'm going to start with the first one that appears on my screen, which is Councillor Craig Gamble-Pugh, who represents the Labour Party. So Craig, if you could switch on your camera and your microphone and give us your opening comments, please. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you to everybody who's helped organise this event, and for everybody that's put the time aside to come and participate in this event. Obviously, it's one of the biggest issues that is facing us in modern human society. We know that we have a climate and nature emergency. It's astonishing to me. I only found out at 6:30 that there were only myself and Alexi on the panel. But I have promised I'm not going to swear this evening, so I will keep drawing deep breaths. My name's Craig Gamble-Pugh. I'm a Labour and Cooperative Party councillor representing the East Ecclesfield ward in the north of the city. I wanted to just make it clear at the outset that although I've been very closely involved in South Yorkshire Climate Alliance for a number of years, and some of you may know me for having been the co-chair of the board of SCA for some time. I remain a board member of the organisation, but I'm here tonight purely to speak on behalf of Sheffield Labour Party. And I think it's important to emphasise that although there are people within the Climate Alliance and the climate movement from all different political hues and none, that the Climate Alliance and the other organisations that are organising this are completely politically neutral. So here we are debating and discussing the climate and nature emergencies as part of Sheffield's fantastic Festival of Debate. And I think that we can take some heart in the fact that we no longer, I don't think, debating if or what the crisis is, which we were stuck on for a long, long time. We're not debating when it's happening. It's happening now. The effects are real. They're out there, and we know when we have to tackle it by. We've set our goal to be a carbon net zero city by 2030. So the debate now is about how we achieve that. It's phenomenally challenging, and debate and involvement from the widest range of people is incredibly important. There is also a debate as we head into the local elections. People were voting currently by post and going to the polling stations next Thursday, the 4th of May. The debate about who is best placed to tackle the climate emergency. And I hope that as we go through the Q&A this evening, I can give a bit of an insight into the passion and the commitment that Labour in Sheffield has to putting the issue of climate and the nature emergency at the heart of everything that we do in the city. And in terms of this debate of who is going to deal with it, well, it's certainly not going to be the parties who didn't show up, because those parties haven't just not showed up to this event. They haven't showed up in terms of addressing the issue. Nationally, we've got a national government run by the Conservative Party who seem to just be presiding over crisis after crisis. Not the climate or nature crisis, but crises of their own manufacturing, sleaze, economic collapse, etc. And you know, when we've got a national government who are just letting companies that are making mega profits out of ripping us all off by selling us fossil-based energy at overinflated prices, where's the incentive nationally for those companies to be switching to sustainable clean energy? The government is literally pumping effluent, and again, I'm trying very hard not to swear. We know what they're pumping into the rivers and the waterways, and it's absolutely outrageous. So they are not going to be part of the solution. They are part of the problem. I think the Liberal Democrats have kind of made themselves pretty irrelevant on all fronts. So for me, the Labour Party's purpose in the world is to achieve fairness, social and economic justice, so that we have a society and an economy that caters for everybody, where nobody is left behind. And with the impacts of climate change already hitting, we are now at the point where there is no social and economic justice to be had unless it goes hand in hand with environmental justice. So my contention actually is that the Labour Party can no longer do the job that it was established to do and has strived to do over many decades. unless climate justice, tackling the climate and nature emergencies, is absolutely at the heart of what we do. So it's crucial.
Start to wind up, please, Craig.
Thank you. It's absolutely crucial to Labour's purpose of being, and that's why I hope that we can, in the debate, discuss some of the things that Labour has to offer in the city and in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. If you'd like to leave your camera on, but mute your microphone, please, that would be best. Thank you. I now want to introduce our second party rep, which is Alexi Diamond, on behalf of the Green Party on Sheffield City Council. Councillor Alexi Diamond, I must get it right. Alexi, you have 5 minutes to give us your opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Yeah, and I'd just like to echo Craig in thanking everyone for coming to this really important hustings. I think obviously the climate emergency is the biggest issue facing us today. It's all of our futures that are at stake. And the climate emergency is the reason why I decided to stand for election in 2021 and become a councillor on Sheffield City Council, to try and get the council to take the action that we need to take if we're going to have any chance of a future. And since I've been elected and been on the council, what I've found is that it's been very frustrating in terms of trying to get the council to adopt the policies that we know are necessary if we are going to become net zero by 2030, if we are going to tackle the biodiversity emergency in Sheffield. And I think that what has been lacking is a political will by the other parties, the established parties in Sheffield. So I'm here to convince you that why you need Greens in the room on Sheffield City Council if we're going to have any hope of tackling the climate emergency locally. I think on every issue, it has been a struggle. We've faced kickback on even what might seem like the smallest changes to get over the line. And it has been a real source of frustration. And I hope that we're going to speak today about those local issues, the things that we can take action on locally in Sheffield, rather than dwell on what the national government is or isn't doing, because we all know that the Tory government is woefully inadequate, is exacerbating the climate emergency, not making it better. However, we can't afford to wait for them to do the right thing, and we can't afford to wait for another government to come in and save us, because there's no guarantee they will anyway. And there are councils around the country, even very close to ours, that have more ambitious targets, that have made much more progress on the climate emergency than we have done in Sheffield. And I think we need to emulate councils like that, like Nottingham. And I'm here to convince you that Sheffield Green Party is the only party that in Sheffield that has the political will to do that. I think Greens on the council make all the councillors seek to up their game on the climate and nature issues. We're the ones that first proposed declaring a climate emergency, which was then rejected and then brought back by a Labour cabinet member just later, so they could claim the credit. We were the ones that got the council to declare a nature emergency as well. And I'm not going to be able to convince you. Obviously, I'd like to see it happen that Greens will take overall control of the council, but I don't think I can convince you that's going to happen. It's very unlikely. But what I will say is that the more Greens that we have on the council, the more we can push Labour and the other parties in the direction that we need to be going to take action on the climate emergency. So a balanced council, a hung council with Greens on the administration, means that we can push for green policies and we can get them supported with support from either one of the two parties. And they will be heard and debated and not rejected out of hand. I think there is the big challenge with the climate emergency is the implementation. But as I said, without Greens on the council, there wouldn't be significant green policies to even implement. I think we can point to times when we have been prepared to make the difficult decisions and get things over the line. For example, with the clean air zone, when Labour and Lib Dems sought to delay the clean air zone, we forced that over the line, even though it wasn't perfect and we thought it could have been better designed and go further. But it was really important that we did get there. I mean, there's other examples like the pedestrianisation of Pinston Street, which was it may be a small thing, but it was a huge battle. So
if you can wind up your comments now, please, Alexi.
Yeah, so I hope over the course of this debate, I can convince you that the Sheffield Green Party have positive policies, which we will fight for, and we will have the political will to act on. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you both for your opening comments. We will now dive straight into questions. And the way this will work is I will ask the question, and then you will each get 2 minutes to respond. And I'm working literally down a page of questions until we reach the end. And at that point, we'll look at opening up to a fuller Q&A with people who are actually watching tonight. So, first question, and I will alternate as to who gets the first opportunity to respond on this. So in this case, it will be Alexi who gets the first opportunity to respond. And the question is, there has been a lot of talk and not a great deal of action since the council declared a nature emergency. What hard targets, with deadlines and supporting finance, is your party committing itself to? Alexi, if you want to tackle that one first.
Thanks very much, Nigel. So yeah, this is a real key issue, which is why we forced the council to declare a climate and nature emergency, and with pressure from local activist groups. I think it is really hard to talk about the hard targets and supporting finance without having feasibility studies, without having briefings from officers to look into how much things would cost. But there already have been things put in place by Sheffield Green Party when we were on the executive, and subsequently. For example, we've really pushed hard on trying to ban glyphosate, and we've had some success there, particularly in parks. And there has also been a feasibility study on banning glyphosate, which we're waiting to hear the results from the Streets Ahead team. And we've got much further to go. We need to get housing on board, and we need to stop the use of glyphosate. We have adopted. I've been on the Waste and Street Scene committee this year. We've adopted a new grass verge policy, which will make it a lot easier for residents to be able to plant grass verges with wildflower without having to go through a difficult process of getting insurance. We'd like to see things adopted in the local.
If you could wind up, please, Alexi.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's only 2 minutes. In the local plan to protect biodiversity, such as ecological impact assessments on all new planning applications. I can think a bit more about that later.
Thank you. Craig, you have a similar 2 minutes to respond to the same question. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to sort of flag up is that Labour's making a commitment in this manifesto in the local elections that we want to establish Sheffield as a centre of excellence for retrofitting skills, working in partnership with the colleges. And I think that's a really crucial thing I want to talk about, because I know from sort of looking at the various different teams of officers within the council and organisations and businesses, that one of the things that is stopping people from taking the actions that they need is there's a gap in the skills and therefore in the supply chain. So even when we have seen actions from national government, like the Green Homes Grant, to try to pump prime the market for people to be able to do the kinds of climate action that they can do to make their homes warmer and cheaper to heat, because their skills aren't out there, the companies aren't out there to do the work, and therefore that halts progress. So I think actually we know that that's a national situation, and I think it's quite an exciting prospect to actually build on Sheffield's past as being a kind of a leading light on the provision of energy. Nobody knows how important energy can be to a local economy and to communities and to culture than if you speak to people that have been living in coal and mining communities. So we've been a leader in energy and those skills and those industries, and actually investing in retrofitting skills and other green skills is a key thing that we want to push as part of Labour's agenda. And you can see again that
if you could wind up, please, Craig.
That sits alongside Labour's traditional emphasis on education. So now we're bringing education in alongside tackling climate emergency.
Thank you, Craig. The next question, Craig, you'll get the opportunity to answer this one first. The Lowcock report on Sheffield's street trees drew attention to poor local engagement practices and a lack of accountability. What is your party committed to doing to ensure this isn't repeated in relation to the development and implementation of the decarbonisation route maps? Craig, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to say that the publication of that report was a real shocker. It was a moment where all of us who were involved in public life and in local government were kind of needing to draw some sharp breaths and really kind of look in the mirror and face up to just how inadequate that whole situation had been dealt with. And I think it's really positive that the council, I think, is united across the political parties, that we have to apologise for the things that went wrong and to accept in full the recommendations that Sir Mark Lowcock has made. And part of that, I think, needs to be a culture change across the organisation about how we tackle things. I know my first stint on the council was in a ward where the trees were an absolutely huge fundamental issue, and I lost my seat when I defended it in the elections in 2018 amidst that whole debate. So I've been on the sharp end of that as an illustration of an issue of where you don't find as representatives a way to hear the solutions and the input that people are bringing. And in actual fact, a lot of terrible things have happened and a lot of people have suffered as a result. And the net result is that we've done all the things that people were pointing to before. So I was down Western Road the other day, and lo and behold, all around these beautiful memorial trees, there are these big patches of flexi-pave, which was exactly what residents and campaigners and people were saying at the time would be the solution. We just had to go through, why did we have to go through that whole kind of disaster in order to get to the right solution? We haven't got time to make those kind of mistakes. Please, Craig. Haven't got time to make those kind of mistakes again. And I think you can see in the way that a lot of the consultation about some of the traffic schemes were undertaken during COVID lockdowns. So the engagement wasn't as good as it should have been, and therefore there's been resistance. So we can't keep affording to make these mistakes.
Thank you, Craig. Alexei, you have the same 2 minutes and the same question, if you'd be so kind.
Yep, thank you very much for the question. I think, actually, contrary to what Craig has said, we didn't actually learn that much that we didn't already know from the Lowcock report. But I will agree that it's damning and Yeah, I'm just a bit worried that there hasn't been that culture change that we need due to the same people who oversaw that, the lies and the misinformation, the doubling down to attack local residents, still being in positions of power. There hasn't been that accountability. That's why we've called for an EGM to discuss that. We were hoping that it could be heard before the election, but it will be after the election. I think where there has been culture change, this is because we moved to a committee system. The committee system, which replaced the strong leader model. And this was a result not of a change of heart by the ruling Labour Party at the time. This was as a result of hard work by campaigners working to change how Sheffield was run. And they were successful in persuading thousands and thousands of people to vote for change in a referendum. This could have happened a long time ago if it had been supported by the Labour Party. And we could have worked on a committee system over a longer period of time, and it could have been the best it can be. But I'm glad it's here now. What we do need to do in order to make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again is fully commit to the committee system, make it work, ensure that we bring the public into committees more effectively than we have done, and that we also hear from experts in their field and invite them to committees. There needs to be more there needs to be more engagement with local people so that that sort of situation.
If you could wind up, please, again. Alexi.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. I support the committee system in it as a way of having more accountability and decisions being made with the consent of the public.
Thank you. And again, thank you both. The next question is much shorter. The answer may not be. And Alexi, you get the opportunity to go first on this one. What will you and your party do to make it easier to cycle in Sheffield? So Alexi, 2 minutes, please.
Okay, so this is something that I'm really passionate about. I think in Sheffield, what we really need in order to be able to encourage more people to cycle is to have safe routes, safe segregated cycle routes that you see in many other countries and cities, even in the UK. And to do that, we need more investment in cycle routes. And to do that, we need to raise money, and we need to make sure that we have the political will to actually follow through with changes that may be initially unpopular, but everyone will see the benefits of. We also need to commit to not spreading misinformation and whipping up hysteria about what the potential impact on businesses might be of having cycle routes, because all the evidence suggests in studies across the country that actually active travel is really good for business. And we would hope to raise millions of pounds a year for investment in public transport and active travel by looking at a workplace parking levy, similar to what they have in Nottingham, which raises their £9 million every year, which they put into active travel and public transport. And this would allow us to invest heavily in routes that would be safe, segregated, and accessible. I quite like to call cycle routes mobility routes as well, because they don't have to be exclusively used by cyclists. They can also be used by people in, it could be for mobility vehicles as well, and scooters. You could have lots of other alternative ways of travelling in segregated cycle routes.
If you could wind up now, please, Alexi.
Yeah, thank you. That's fine.
Excellent, thank you very much. Craig, 2 minutes, same question.
I'm going to use a quarter of each of my allocated portions of time trying to unmute myself. Bear with me. So I think that we've got some really exciting cycling schemes and modal shift schemes in the works. I mean, there's a really exciting scheme, the Little Holland scheme, which is in and around Darnall. And I think that's a really good example of where there's actually a community with relatively low car ownership. Quite a lot of people are isolated. There's a lower than average degree of economic engagement and activity. So getting people active, getting people able to get around, get out of that kind of air polluted, choked up part of town, and take the ownership. For years we've been trying to sort of slow people down going through there on the M1, but actually giving people the tools and giving people the freedom to be able to be part of a solution themselves is quite empowering. And I think some of the schemes that people kind of harangue me about when I talk to constituents at surgeries and on the doorstep, where cycle lanes have gone in and they've not been quite right, and then they've had to come out or be changed or whatever. I think there's two things I would say to that. First of all, it's perfectly fine when these sort of low traffic neighbourhood schemes are being trialled and they're done through experimental road closures. The clue is in the question. They're experimental, and if we don't experiment with things, how are we going to find new ways of solving these problems? The second thing is that the way that the funding works for a lot of these schemes, it's so stop-start and sporadic. There's no strategy from central government on it, and that means that we have to put a scheme together because there's some money on offer. There isn't the time to do all the engagement which we've talked about, and that creates an environment where we get things wrong.
If you could wind up, please, now, Craig.
Yeah, I'll leave that there.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question. Craig, you get first crack at this one. What commitments will you make to proactively supporting community groups and organisations who want to use their green spaces for nature recovery and well-being? Craig, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. Well, I think it's something that a lot of us as ward councillors, and I know a lot of our candidates across the city, are very involved in things like Friends of Parks groups. I think it's really positive within the Nature Recovery Sheffield network that you look at some of the local organisations and community groups that are doing things like planting trees locally, clearing parks, allowing bits of that were green deserts before to rewild and provide better biodiversity services for us all. So I think increasing the way that we support those community groups, friends of groups, etc. And I think also looking at how we use the policy frameworks that we've set out in the local plan. So, for example, we had a really excellent presentation at one of the committees that I serve on from a group that were campaigning for Swift boxes to be incorporated into new build properties. So engaging with those groups, because actually this is how people are passionate about things across the city, and they've got the solutions to stuff that otherwise we might overlook. So enabling a kind of open culture where people can have that dialogue with us and provide the solutions for us is actually a kind of quick win, really.
Okay, thank you very much. Ahead of time. Excellent. Alexi, you now have 2 minutes on the same question, please.
Thank you, Nigel. So in our ward in Gleadless Valley, we're really proactive in supporting and working with community groups. We've got a really amazing network of community gardens. We're really lucky in that we've got the Gleadless Valley Wildlife Trust as well to work with there. And there's lots of exciting things going on. So I think it's really important for local councillors to support those groups with ward pots. And council-wide as well, we've got a really we've recently made it a lot easier for local people to get trees in their local area on the streets. So there's if you go onto a website called Trees for Streets, you can now have a look if you can get a tree planted on your street via this app, which is really useful. We've been working to try and get trees in places where there's not much greenery, not much trees, such as the bottom of Chesterfield London Road, which might help with urban drainage as well. So it's really important to get more trees in there for flooding reasons and climate mitigation. We want to work with organisations like Regather on a sustainable food strategy to help local people also to grow more in Sheffield. We've got a lot of farmland in Sheffield, but sustainable farming, which will benefit the local community, is something that we really want to support. And yeah, I'm glad that Craig mentioned Swift boxes. That's another thing that we'd like to see in the local plan on all new build. Another thing that we tried to do is protect local urban green spaces in the local plan. Unfortunately, we were outvoted there, but it's something that we'll still push for, and making sure that any ecology impact and climate impact assessment, biodiversity net gain is actually real and measurable, rather than sort of a tick box.
Wind up, please, Alexi.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Alexi, you get the first chance on this one, which will probably give Craig a bit more time to think on this one, because it confused me when I first read it. The question is, the science is clear that we need to reduce meat consumption or switch to plant-based options in order to tackle the climate crisis and enable nature recovery. What measures will your party take to influence meat consumption patterns in Sheffield? So Alexi, you're first on this one. 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, so something that we have already been trying to work on is getting school dinners to make sure that we've been ensure that there is already 1 day a week that's a meat-free day. I think saying that making that 2 days would be really good. There's also the plant-based treaty that other councils have signed across the country, and that commits all meals at council functions, which there aren't that many of, and we certainly don't get any free lunches at the council now. But I think if there is any functions that the council is putting on, if they offered a meat-free meal, a plant-based meal at them, that's already doing a small thing to reduce consumption, but also sets a really good example that other groups can emulate. And it's all about education and having those conversations. So it's not something that the council can enforce and say, we're going to ban meat, because obviously you couldn't do that. But you could, just by having that, adopting the plant-based treaty in Sheffield, and encouraging a meat-free day every week in schools at least, then people will be having those conversations, and you'll be saying, why are you doing this? And you can explain. So yeah, I think it's nudging people in the right direction with behaviour, encouraging vegan markets and things like that. They're always really popular.
Okay, thank you for that, Alexi. And Craig, same question, and again, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, I've had some contact with the plant-based treaty organisation, and when we first started to correspond, I think the expectation was, well, if the council just cuts out meat and dairy from its catering operation, it will make a massive difference. And I was like, we don't, I think there's a jug of milk that we get once every 6 weeks at the full council meetings. We could swap that for non-dairy, but I don't know how much of an impact it will make. But yeah, there is a catering operation there. So this is not something that we've talked about as a party group, and we've not got anything in our manifesto on it specifically. But as an individual member of the relevant committee, I have asked officers to have a look at what the total kind of catering output is, so that we can kind of make an assessment about what the impact would be, and what the implications of it would be. One of the things that we can do to encourage people to make those behavioural changes, Alexi already talked about the need for a sustainable food strategy, and if we can actually support organisations and food producers and manufacturers and suppliers in the local economy, then not only are we kind of building up our ability to sort of do community wealth building and develop that kind of donut economics where things aren't being imported from all over the place and the carbon footprint of our food is going down, but we're also meaning that kind of non-meat, plant-based food produce is going to be in more ready, reliable supply more locally, which then reduces the price, which then means it's more attractive to buy, you know, local produce that's cheap and affordable, rather than, you know, the price of meat is astronomical, and that's even before you look at that's before you look at the real cost of meat, if you actually factor in proper ethical treatment of animals and ethical production methods. So actually, sustainable food strategy is one way to kind of lead people away from meat and towards plant-based.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And now it's your turn to go first. And the question is, how does your party intend to improve recycling provision in Sheffield in general, and to reduce the use of single-use plastics in particular? So Craig, 2 minutes on that one, please. Thank you.
In terms of recycling, I think there was a recent council meeting where there was a lot of people got really excited, and people were starting to wave around the different sized receptacles that different parties have introduced for recycling when in different administrations over the last 15 years. So we don't want to get into that. We don't want to get into that kind of debate today. I think, again, this is one where things need to be done in a way that brings the public with us. So there are some people in my ward who find it arduous to have the space to store the different wheelie bins and to sort it all out. There are people who are living in flats and communal buildings who don't have the same access to the curbside collections that many others do. So we can look at pushing forward on those things. We can also look at pushing our private sector contractors to actually take more of a variety of plastics and look at where we can unblock things, which mean that it's too selective. And at the minute, you know, we have to put a certain categories of plastics in our brown bin, and then the rest we collect it up and we have to take it to the collection points. The other thing is that we have supported on the Waste and Street Scene Committee this year. Representatives from the Labour Party were very keen to support the trial of the food waste collections. I argued really hard for my ward to be one of the trial areas of the city that came to. On the whole, we've had no complaints. I think there were people who were saying, like, oh, there's going to be rats and maggots and foxes and all kinds of kind of biodiversity that people aren't so keen on. That doesn't seem to have happened. People have been really keen, and we've actually got people now saying, why have we not got it? When can we have it back? So I think that's something that there's probably a general agreement that we kind of need to push for it to be brought in on a permanent basis and rolled out. And that's a really good example
of bringing people with you. Please.
It's a good example of bringing people with you.
Thank you very much. Alexi, same question, same 2 minutes, please.
Thanks very much. So I've been on the Waste and Street Scene committee this year. So yeah, the food waste trial was really successful and exciting. And the issue that we're waiting for is that central government are supposed to mandate, and they're supposed to be bringing out a white paper on this as soon as possible. Well, already telling us what we have to recycle, which should include like lots more different plastics, because at the moment we don't recycle enough plastics in Sheffield. So yeah, we're really keen to get that food waste trial extended to the whole city. And adopted as soon as possible. We've also supported different approaches to collecting waste. In my ward, we've got the Leadless Valley Master Plan. We've been working really hard to make sure that waste management are on that, to look at ways of collecting waste much more effectively in different communities. So you've got high-rise flats, you've got masonettes, you've got different areas like that. Other things that we've looked at, as the Green Party generally, we support the plastic-free pledge. So we'd like to remove single-use plastic from all council operations and premises, and encourage plastic-free initiatives. As a group that works called Plastic-Free Sheffield Central, which I've met with a few times, and I'd be very keen to. I've been working again in the Waste and Street Scene Committee for the markets to try and ban single-use plastics from any food markets that they have. So that's something that I'm advocating for. We could have a rep on plastic-free.
If I could wind you up, please, Alexei.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Just to recap, another thing that we look at as well is community composting, and whether that could work alongside any future food waste trial. So basically, plastic-free pledge, and making sure that we recycle as much of our waste, and also reduce waste by promoting the right to repair.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We're now on to the penultimate question of this first round. And Alexei, you get the opportunity to answer first on this one. In 7 years' time, all new cars must be electric. What plans do you have for facilitating electric vehicle charging for Sheffield residents with no off-street parking? And when would these plans be completed? Alexei, 2 minutes, please.
So the council has already started to roll out more electric vehicle charging, and we've got some charging points in our ward. Some of that's been by the mayoral authority, and some of that has been by the council itself. And that could be in all the council-owned car parks. We'd also encourage private car parks to have charging facilities as well. But I'm clear, and the Green Party is clear, that the electric cars are not the answer to the climate emergency. The embodied carbon in new cars is not sustainable. Cars clog our roads, they're dangerous, they're far less efficient than reliable public transport. So we would be looking far more to make sure that the alternative to the car is our priority. We would try and electrify the buses, and install more infrastructure for taxis to become electric, as they have done in Nottingham, which has a far more ambitious carbon neutral by 2028 target. So I think we could have made a lot of ground on this already. We haven't done because of the lack of political will by the other parties. But while we do need to roll out more electric car charging points, and I agree that they should be off-road and accessible to everyone, not just people that can afford to have a drive. Also, we need to make sure that we're clear that cars are not the answer. The future is public transport, active travel, electric bikes, cargo bikes, and all the other options. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexei. And Craig, the same question, the same 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is a good juncture to bring in the fact that a lot of the solutions, a lot of the work on finding solutions to kind of issues like this is being done already by our peers in other local authorities across the country. I was lucky enough to represent the council on the UK 100 Climate Leadership Academy. The UK 100 is a network of local government leaders who are committed to tackling the climate emergency. And through that network, us as politicians and officers in the council who are implementing solutions have got access to this incredible wealth of experience and good practice. So there are things that are out there in terms of new technologies for people who live in houses that don't have driveways and need to park on the street, where There are channels that can go from the pavement through the street that are being trialled. There are solutions that involve electric hookup points being built into the street lights, the lighting columns. There are things like local charging hubs. There are things like getting the infrastructure in place so that the new generation of car charging points, will be not very much longer where you're standing, holding the plug to your car like you do topping up with diesel or petrol now. It's so quick and so rapid. But actually, yeah, the part of the thing here is our public transport infrastructure has just crumbled under a lack of investment nationally, and the sort of unhelpful policies that have been pursued. So what's the alternative? So we talked already about incorporating segregated infrastructure for active transport routes and cycling and walking routes, getting people off the main highways some of the time so that they can see our blue-green infrastructure and be going along the canal banks and the river banks and through the parks and the little pockets of green space. But actually, we need to be fundamentally reforming the bus system, and that's why Labour, through the Labour South Yorkshire Mayor, has initiated the process of bringing buses back under public control. Because until we've got that accountability in the public transport system, we've just not got the levers at our disposal to kind of get people out of cars. And I wanted to say something else about trees, if I can, because part of the issue of us transitioning away from cars is, it's not just the embodied carbon that Alex talks about, it's the particulate matter that's thrown up from car tires and brake pads and the friction of the vehicles going along the roadways. And increasing street tree cover is one of the ways that we can mean that there's the tree infrastructure there, which can capture and take a lot of that particulate matter. So it's sitting on the leaves of trees and not swirling around going into our lungs and blood system. So.
Thank you, Craig. And now we're on to our final question for this particular section before we go to the audience Q&A. How will your party ensure there is joined up planning and delivery for the training and skills required for nature recovery and climate action? Craig, if you can take this one first, please. 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. So I already said about how, it's one of the resounding kind of things that smacks me in the face whenever I'm talking to different teams in different industries and parts of the council about what the barriers are, is that we don't have the skills, we don't have people who are qualified and able to work in the green industries that we need. So I talked earlier about Labour's manifesto proposal to establish Sheffield as a centre of excellence for retrofit skills. So that's one of the things that we would be doing. I think also we've talked about looking at as a specialist business zone to kind of really invest and provide a home for green manufacturing skills across the Sheffield to Rotherham corridor. So we've kind of built that into the local plan that's now kind of gone through its public consultation process. So there are some kind of clear. They're just a couple of clear examples of how we do it. I mean, for my part, I think that we need to be building in these kind of skills into the core curriculum so that kids, we know that children and young people in schools and the education system are really passionate about tackling the climate crisis. We need to also be building them the skills so that they can come out of it with the qualifications to be part of the solutions and taking the actions that we need to restructure the economy and restructure society so that we're tackling it and that it works for everybody.
Okay, thank you. Under time again. I'm impressed. Alexi, your turn now. Same question, 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nigel. I think the most important thing is to have joined up planning and delivery. So to get everyone in the room at the outset and co-produce the solutions. So we've got really loads of trusted and talented and dedicated organisations in Sheffield that we can work with to make these things happen. So development trusts in different areas of the city, wildlife trust, lots of community partners, local businesses, activists that really care about Sheffield. So it's really about getting everyone in the room at the time when we're designing these themes. It's also in the local plan, for example, making sure that when any new build has guaranteed jobs for local people, and also rewilding is another way that we can really make sure that a lot of people have good jobs in the local area. I talked about the sustainable food strategy as well. I think that would be another key part of that. Retrofitting houses with the community. So again, making sure that we have put into place criteria that means that local people have to be employed in any developments, and making sure that those developments are sustainable and of a really high standard as well.
Okay, thank you, Alexi. Both under time on that question, which is fascinating. Right, that reaches the end of the questions that I had prior to the start of the meeting. So we can now move on to the audience Q&A. And I'll start at the top. What Joe mentioned, that the upvoting approach does mean that the most popular questions are the ones that reach the top. And having done so, I will also be trying to avoid any repetition of questions that have already been asked, or any that are aimed at just one of the party representatives that are here. We need to be asking questions that both can offer an answer to. Okay, so first question. And Alexi, you get first go on this one. Active travel, walking, wheeling and cycling, and especially affordable and reliable public transport are central to tackling climate change and has many other health, etc. benefits. What policies will you introduce to promote active travel and better buses, given recent government cuts and general budget tightening? Alexi, one for you.
Yeah, so I think we're clear in Sheffield Green Party that we will always prioritise public transport over and active travel. So I don't know if you've seen the plans for Connecting Sheffield, but we're very supportive of the plans for Connecting Sheffield. We know that Exel Road it wasn't a surprise to read in the Star, for example, as Mazar Iqbal claimed he was shocked to find that Exel Road was one of the most dangerous roads in the country. Now, if we're going to make this modal shift, we need to make it safe, and we need to make public transport reliable. That means giving priority to buses and bus lanes. And that can be done with the community. It doesn't need to be, prohibited. You can plan in things, so like parking bays for disabled parking, or parking bays for and specific times for loading for businesses. I mean, all the evidence that I've ever seen, all the studies show that active travel and bus lanes are actually good for business. I think there's been a lot of misinformation that's been spread deliberately by Lib Dems and Labour to try and row back on progressive schemes like Connecting Sheffield, but we would support them. We'd also put in place a workplace parking levy, which would charge the biggest businesses in the city centre. We want a feasibility study to see how this would work, first of all, but the biggest employers in the city centre, it could be those with 10 or more parking spaces, would be charged for those parking spaces, and then that money would be reinvested in public transport and active travel. In Nottingham, that scheme brings about £9 million a year, and they've had such amazing success in electrifying their buses and having really reliable buses. Their buses have won awards, and these are all things that we can do.
Wind up, please, Alexi.
for the government, but unfortunately, both of the parties don't support any of these, either the workplace parking levy or the Connecting Sheffield scheme, and they don't want to prioritise. We will always have the political will to support these.
Okay, thank you. Craig, again, same question, same 2 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think there, what I begin to hear from Alexei is, that there's a commitment to push and to kind of and to kind of be the conscience of the council on these matters. And therein lies the difference, because as a party that's very, relatively unlikely to get into administration, it's okay to play that function. But actually, when we, as all of us on the current Hung Council have experiences, when things are pursued and we don't take the public with us, then it just comes down to the old cliches of Sheffield Council hates cars. Sheffield Council trying to ban us. We're trying to kind of keep people out of the city centre and ruin everything for everybody. And that is certainly not true of the Labour Party. We accept, we back Connecting Sheffield. It's a really excellent strategy. What I think we've seen as the various schemes that are part of Connecting Sheffield have come through the Transport and Climate Change Committee is that there's just been no kind of focus on the fact that this is part of an overall strategy. It's all been about the detail. And we as a citywide policy committee of councillors don't have the local knowledge and expertise to know how you can implement the different schemes in different neighbourhoods. So one of the things that we're backing is to push more control and influence over those local schemes to the ward councillors and to the local area committees, so that actually we can get it right. We do want to do, we want to do these things. Modal shift is clearly crucial. We've got a transport plan that's now quite old and needs updating. That sets out a really ambitious target of how much reduction there needs to be in car journeys. But we won't achieve that. We will achieve it more easily and more quickly if we do it in a way that brings the public along for the journey.
Okay, thank you. And the next question on my list, or the next question I'm going to use is, could we use the Green New Deal as a cross-party framework to bring green jobs to Sheffield and embrace the trouble with this thing is it keeps moving around. Bring green jobs to Sheffield and embrace an equitable transition that joins all the dots. Craig, you get the first option on this one. 2 minutes, please.
Could we use the Green New Deal as it? Yeah. Well, thank you, Joan, for the question. Hello. Yes, I think is the answer to that. The work that the Green New Deal as a campaigning organisation is doing, and Green New Deal South Yorkshire, it's a really good example of how, as politicians, we're looking for the solutions. And actually, if you turn to groups with the passion and the expertise, it can really help to get you to where you need to be a lot more quickly. And that's that process, as Joan says in her question, about joining the dots. And the issue about the equitable transition is it links to the point that I was attempting clumsily to make before, which is that we need an equitable transition for people to be able to move away from dependency on cars. So that part of that is that we put the cycling and active travel infrastructure in place, and that we reform public transport. We get investment into buses, and we electrify the bus fleet, which is something that we've already begun. But we do that so that people have got a natural pathway to get out of their cars and away from their cars and do things differently without kind of making life more difficult and costly for people, because when we do that, it impacts most heavily on the people who can least afford the brunt of it. So any transition has to be a just and equitable transition. because there's no point having, no point striving for climate justice if we don't focus on social and economic justice as well. Because otherwise, what are we doing it for? They have to go hand in hand. So that's about being just and equitable in how we provide that transition. And I think the Green New Deal can be definitely part of that. And thank you, Joan, for asking.
Thank you, Craig. Spot on, in terms of time, at least. Alexei, 2 minutes on the same question, please.
Thank you very much for the question, Joan. I think, yeah, obviously a Green New Deal would be really welcome, but unfortunately that's got to come from national government. And I'm clear that we don't have the chance to wait. We don't have the time to wait for national government to come up with the solutions to climate problems. We need to start doing it now. And we can do that in Sheffield. I'm going to want to push back a bit on what Craig said about workplace parking levy or action to prioritise public transport not being equitable. 30% of Sheffield households don't have a car, and in the most deprived wards in the city, that rises to 50% or more. So, they already can't get around. By introducing measures to prioritise public transport and also make active travel more accessible, that is actually a really equitable way of supporting people in the most deprived areas of the city to get around. I think it's good for the environment, it's good for the climate emergency, it's good for local people, it's good for communities. I just can't see any reason why they would not want to support measures like a workplace parking levy that could bring millions of pounds now into what's subject to a planning stage and feasibility study, and it's not dependent on central government at all. It's not equitable to not take action on the climate emergency, because our children, grandchildren, they're going to be the ones affected. They're the ones that are dying disproportionately on Sheffield roads, which have they're really dangerous when you compare to other core cities. Children under 15 almost twice as likely to be either seriously injured or killed on Sheffield roads than other core cities. So this is really urgent, and it's
if you could wind up, please, Alexei.
Yeah, thank you. But yes,
okay.
I love a Green New Deal, but we need to take action locally as well now.
Right, thank you. Next question, and Alexei, this one's yours for the first go. What will your party do to invest more into parks, woodlands and blue corridors? When will austerity measures end in the parks and open spaces, which are so important to us all? So Alexei, that one's for you to start. 2 minutes, please.
I mean, that is a really difficult question. I'd love for austerity to end. It's a self-defeating policy that never should have been brought in the first place. Ways of bringing more investment into parks could be, again, working with their community groups to attract more people to parks by doing some community projects there, working with local organisations. Maybe you could have community orchards like we're looking at in Gleedless Valley. Different events that we could hold around the year, but obviously events that have the community's backing. We also do have local ward pots where we can support local initiatives. We've got the LACT now, which we could use to invest in ideas to support our parks. So I think if you do have an idea, get in touch with your local councillor, get in touch with your local area committee, and get in touch with the parks policy committee. And if you do have some good ideas, I think it's all about bringing the right people into the room, because we do have a wealth of talent and expertise in Sheffield, which we can draw on. I would love to say that we could have lots more investment, but that's something that we'd need to find ways to raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexei. Craig, parks, woodlands and blue corridors.
Thank you.
Your answer, 2 minutes.
Thanks, Nigel. I think I'll just give a brief answer on this one, because I think really good illustration of the way that Labour in administration in the city's been creative and flexible about how we've used the funds that are available to us. So Labour's managed to put a lot of investment into parks and local green spaces through recognising that those are spaces which have an absolutely enormous public health benefit and a public health impact. So we've been able to use a portion of the public health funding that's available to us as the local authority to invest into our parks and green spaces. So there are practical things we are living through this appalling kind of contradictory, wasteful, harmful period of austerity. However, we do have the flexibility and the freedom to use the resources that we are left with to invest in creative ways. And I think also, engaging with local communities and involving people in parks. So, we in our local park in Ecclesfield, we don't have the funding to, get contract people to come in and do tree planting. So we've just done a community tree planting event, planted a new avenue of heavy standards. So there are little things and not so little things that we can do, and actually valuing the green infrastructure that we have as actually having a value to us as a society and as a local economy as well. And it's seeing these things as something we can invest in and that we get a return from. So we part of it's this concept of invest to save. So you put money into parks and green spaces, people use them more, they're healthier, reduces the impact on health. One of the disadvantages structurally that we have in local government is that
wind up, please, Craig.
We have a responsibility for some of the things that need to be spent and no money to spend, but we don't have devolved power over some of the areas where there might be savings. So until we get more devolved powers and devolved budgets locally, we can't join those dots up.
Thank you, Craig. Next question, and Craig gets to go first on this one. Interesting. Will you show leadership on things that are unpopular but necessary, such as the red lines and LTNs, I assume that's low traffic neighbourhoods, and defend them, or will you capitulate, as seems to be what is happening? So Craig, you get the first opportunity on that one. 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, I've already mentioned earlier that I think a lot of the consultation processes to engage with the public for some of the schemes that have kind of been trialled and have been kind of mooted and got close to implementation now seem to have happened. And we've been round and round the houses with this on the Transport and Climate Change Committee. The consultation's been done, the tick box is there, and yet because that was done while we were in COVID lockdown, I think there've got to be questions asked about the quality of it, and we certainly haven't brought people along for the journey. But in terms of showing leadership, I think that we've got councillors and candidates like Nigat Basharat and Ibi Ullah in Netheredge and Sharrow, Laura McLean in Walkley, John Bright, who's our candidate in Crooks and Crossbourne, and all these awards where there've been low traffic neighbourhood schemes have been trialled. There've been some elements have been controversial, and I think the leadership that my colleagues in the Labour Party have shown on those schemes is to just make sure that they've been out, hand in glove with people. I saw footage of people in Crooks who were, out on the streets because there were elements of the schemes that they really didn't like, and those local ward councillors and candidates were there talking to people, letting people get let off steam about what their perceptions were, and making sure, crucially, that if there's a different solution that can be implemented to achieve the overall goal, that we listen to what local people are saying, and that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So that where there are, the vast majority of parts of those schemes which aren't controversial, which people do welcome, they see the benefit of straight away, is that we make sure that those bits are kind of understood and welcomed and stay in place.
Wind that one up, please, Craig.
And I think that's a really good way of moving things forward. And I'd give credit to those colleagues of mine in those wards who've done that work, because I think that's leadership in action.
Thank you. Alexi, same question. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Nigel. So yeah, I just want to disagree with everything that Craig's just said there, unfortunately, which you probably won't be surprised by, but and say that the Greens will absolutely have the courage. I think the only reason that any of these schemes are here in the first place, because there are Greens in the room. If it wasn't for the Greens, the CAS probably wouldn't have got over the line. We wouldn't have Pinston Street being pedestrianised now. What happened in Nether Edge compared to where there's 2 Green councillors, compared to Walkley and Crooks, compared to Crooks and Crosspool, where there isn't any Green councillors in Crooks and Crosspool, is that we've got a successful ATN or low traffic neighbourhood there, whereas in Crooks and Crosspool, measures were taken out before they'd even had a chance to see whether they're effective or not. I think that is the wrong way to do consultation, to go on the day that the measures are put in, when some people are angry, to put officers in an awful position to be harangued by a certain section of local people that are angry, but not to hear from any of the people that might have benefited, such as, did they consult the children on their way to school? Did they consult any of the parents? I mean, did they not wait for a few months just to see what the results would have been? And I'm actually quite shocked at some of the negative attack ads that the Labour Party has paid for in social media, on Instagram and Facebook, blaming the Green Party for the CAS, scaremongering about red lines, scaremongering about workplace parking levies, scaremongering about the impacts on businesses of low traffic neighbourhoods, or prioritising buses, when actually these are all things that would benefit local people. Studies show that they benefit local businesses, and that's the sort of debate, an honest debate that we need to have without any scaremongering. Thank you.
Okay, this I think will be our last question, and it's a long question, so a shorter answer, please, if you can manage that. Climate crisis is so crucial to be dealt with. It needs all of us to work together, and for parties to do so. We need to look at what parts of our political system discourage parties from doing that, and what we can do to change this. Voting for our local councillors every year means that the parties are always looking at how they are different from the other parties, instead of what they have in common. Moving to all-out elections for our councillors once every 4 years, instead of voting every year for one councillor and then having a fallow year, could provide a better environment for the parties to work together more. Do you agree? So hopefully that will be a fairly short response. I'll start with Alexi on this one, and if you can keep it to about a minute.
Yeah, so I think I kind of agree in that I would love not to have an election to fight every year and we could get on with the job. There's a bit of caution though. If you elected a group for 4 years, you're stuck with all of those councillors for 4 years. If it coincides with a general election, we know that affects, it might affect how many Greens get elected, for example, because people tend to vote, or they might vote the same way they did on national lines as they do on local lines. But there is caution. I can see the pros and cons, but I'm not sold on the idea of having all-out elections, but maybe there is a better way that we can do it that we're not doing currently. I think what's really important is that we learn that we are no longer in a strong leader model. There are no executive members anymore, so people should stop acting like executive members and announcing policy decisions unilaterally on the radio without any consultation.
If you could wind up, please, Alexi.
So, yeah, I think the other issue, the elephant in the room, is first past the post. Without first past the post, we'd be forced to work together in it a lot more. And I think we'd be a lot more representative of local people, both in council elections and in general elections, if we had first past the post.
Okay, thank you. And Craig, again,
I mean,
if you could do this within a minute, that would be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, so I personally, I'm in favour of reform of democratic systems. I think that you know, I would really like to see us move towards proper proportional representation. I say that with some trepidation because I'm quite clear that, you know, it's likely to be the parties that are currently the bigger parties that would potentially lose out in that. But I think, you know, consensus building, consensus-based politics is the way to go. It's really, really difficult to do, and the new committee system it has its challenges, and my phone's just ringing. I'm just checking in case it's anyone telling me I'm in huge amounts of trouble, but it's not. So I think it would be really good to have a proper look at what the options are for moving to all outs or to 2 smaller wards with 2 members per ward, and then you have an election and then a year off. I think if the move away from leader in cabinet has showed us anything, it showed us that you can actually change and reform local government and local democracy, and which is something that wasn't possible before. There were a lot of us banging our heads against brick walls trying to sort of shift things. So whatever people's views are about how well things are working now, at least we've shown that we can keep reforming. We can change it again. We could change it again and again and again and again until we get it right. And then when it stops being right, we can change it some more. So, you know, I'm probably going to get shot on the way out.
I need to stop you there if I may. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm afraid that brings us to the end of the audience Q&A. Some really good questions in there. Thank you very much. And apologies to those whose questions didn't get through. There were a lot of questions in the end, 20 questions. We didn't have enough for all of them. And we will now move on to closing comments from the party representatives. And I will start this time with Craig, if that's okay with you. Yeah. And again, 2 minutes of closing comments, please. Thank you.
Yeah. I just think, you know, we have to really look at, there's some questions that I saw that were about, okay, so there's lots of ideas being chucked around, where's the plan? I find it really frustrating. I was part of putting together the original decarbonisation Green City strategy in 2017 or 18. The pace of change, you know, is too slow. We can't afford for it to be. So I think what people have got an opportunity for in the local elections is to look at voting for Labour candidates who are really have got a proven commitment and track record and a passion. We're not necessarily here to be the policy experts. We're here to exert the political leadership and push things in the direction that they need to go. So when you've got candidates like Julie Grocott in Stocksbridge, George Linders Hammond in Hillsborough, Bridget Kelly in East Ecclesfield alongside me, these are Laura McLean in Walkley. These are people that are so passionate, have been working so hard to campaign to improve and reform buses and public transport. Those are the people we need to kind of keep in the council. We need to bring those new people into the council, because they will help to push forward the agendas that we've been discussing tonight. People like, you know, Labour candidates, like if you live in Graves Park, look up Amy Mount, speak to Amy. You know, you very rarely find such passionate advocates for climate action within local government. People like, you know, people in seats like Fulwood that have never ever elected a Labour councillor before. We've got Matt Kalea, who, you know, he's you know, really deeply into the policy. He's had papers and articles published on how local government can take forward these issues and tackle it. So in summary, you know we had the IPCC's report, in response to which, you know, the Secretary of the UN said, I hereby appeal directly to everyone with an interest in our planet and our future, make your voice heard. Next Thursday, the 4th of May, everybody in Sheffield has got an opportunity to make their voices heard. And I hope they'll make their voices heard by voting for Labour candidates with a commitment to tackling the climate crisis.
If I can wind you up there.
Thank you.
Craig, thank you very much. And the last word, as far as the party reps go, goes to Alexi Diamond. 2 minutes, please, Alexi.
Thanks very much, Nigel. So yeah, I just really like to reiterate what I've said during this whole debate. If you want people that have the courage and political will to take action on the climate and ecological emergencies and see it through, and not resort to populism. We're here for a reason. The only reason that we want to get elected is so we can take action and just choices to have a just transition on the climate emergency, to move to a well-being economy instead of an economy focused on economic growth. We have the political will. We want to do it. We have policies that we could enact if only other parties would support us in doing that. Without the Greens in the room, I don't think any of the changes necessary would even be on the table, let alone get passed. And I do agree with Craig that there are some dedicated Labour councillors, but unfortunately they're not free to do and say as they want. You know, they were all whipped into voting against proportional representation at a recent full council meeting, and it only passed because the Greens managed to get the support of the Lib Dems to support proportional representation. And you can see what happened when Labour candidates or councillors do not toe the party line. You've seen that Emily Wilson got removed as the candidate in Broomhill and Sharrow Vale. So, you know, if you want climate action and you want councillors that are free to take the necessary action that you want, that we need to see if we're going to have any chance of survival as a species, please vote for your Green Party candidate. And you can vote for your Green Party candidate in whatever seat you're in Sheffield, because we are sending a full slate. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexi. Two-time. All good. This is where I draw to a close the actual hustings element of this evening's events. And I would just like to thank Greg Gamble-Pugh on behalf of the Labour Party and Alexi Diamond on behalf of the Green Party for attending tonight. I'll pass no comment on anybody else. And I particularly want to thank the audience who provided questions before the event and also during the event. And I'm sorry we didn't get to them all. And finally, I want to thank Hope for the Future, South Yorkshire Climate Alliance, and Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust for hosting this event and for asking me to chair it. It's been very enjoyable. So I'll now pass you over to Ian Cracknell, who has a few final words. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Well, a round of applause. I'd like a round of applause for both our speakers and for Nigel for his fantastic chairing. Thank you all very much. I'd also like to thank our co-organisers of the event, Alex Clegg from Hope for the Future, Jeff Cox and Sarah John from Hope for the Future. Sorry, Alex Clegg from Hope for the Future, Jeff Cox and Sarah John for South Yorkshire Climate Alliance, for all their hard work in putting this evening's event together. And lastly, thanks to Joe and all of the team at Festival of Debate for hosting and supporting this event. And thanks ever so much to all our attendees for coming along. As Nigel said, for all the questions. I hope you found it an engaging, interesting and informative debate. I certainly have. Please do use your vote on the 4th of May. It is an action you can take for climate and nature, as I'm sure you've heard and understood through this. Don't forget, you'll also need to provide photo ID, really important when voting in person for these elections. I've shared a link to information about this in the chat from the council. I also just want to mention a couple of other events in the festival programme that you might be interested in. I added links to those in the chat as well. One from Nature Recovery Sheffield, the Nature Emergency, People and Communities. A host of really great speakers on access to nature through the perspective of different communities. There's stalls from local community groups. That's on Thursday, 11th of May at 7 p.m. at the Dorothy Fleming Lecture Theatre. And another one I wanted to highlight is effective campaigning to end the climate crisis, organised for Festival Debate in partnership with Sheffield for Democracy. And that includes speakers from South Yorkshire Climate Alliance, Friends of the Earth, Sheffield and more, being held at the Central United Reformed Church, Tuesday the 16th of May at 7 p.m. So finally, once again, thank you to all our speakers, to my co-organisers, to Festival Debate, and of course to all of you for attending. I'd like to wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.